The Wisdom of Grace. A story of kindness and under. The morning sun cast long shadows across the boardroom on the 42nd floor, its golden light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the bustling city below. Margaret. Jen adjusted her reading glasses and glanced once more at the unusual resume in front of her. As the head of human resources for Beacon Industries, she had seen thousands of applications over her 30-year career, but this one was different. Grace Miller, 17 years old, from a small farming town 3 hours outside the city. No college degree, no corporate experience, no connections. Yet something about her handwritten cover letter had touched Margaret's heart. The girl had written about caring for her ailing grandmother while helping her father manage their family farm, about rising before dawn to tend to the animals, and about dreams that reached far beyond the horizon of their wheat fields. Margaret had convinced the CEO, Richard Blackstone, to give the young woman an interview. It hadn't been easy. Richard was a man who measured success in quarterly profits and stock prices, not in character and heart. At 58, he had built Beacon Industries from a small startup into a Fortune 500 company through sheer determination and what some called ruthless business acumen. "This is a waste of time, Margaret," Richard had said, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit impeccable. "We need experienced professionals, not some farm girl with big dreams." But Margaret had persisted, sensing something special in Grace's words. Now, as she watched the elevator doors open to reveal a young woman in a simple navy dress and worn but polished shoes, Margaret felt her instincts had been correct. Grace Miller stepped into the boardroom with quiet confidence, her long brown hair neatly braided, her eyes bright with intelligence and warmth. She carried herself with the dignity that comes from honest work and genuine purpose. Richard sat at the head of the mahogany table, surrounded by 6 other executives, all waiting to see what this country girl could possibly offer their sophisticated company. "Miss Miller," Richard began, his tone already dismissive, "I'll be direct. You have no relevant experience, no degree, and frankly, I'm not sure why you're here. But since you've made the trip, let's see what you have to say." Grace nodded respectfully, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Blackstone. I know my background is different from what you usually see." "Different is one word for it," Richard replied, leaning back in his leather chair. "Tell me, what makes you think you can succeed in the corporate world when you've spent your life on a farm?" There was a gentle pause as Grace considered her response. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear, carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned life's lessons through experience rather than textbooks. "Mr. Blackstone, every morning for the past 3 years, I've woken up at 4:30 to help my father with the milking. Our dairy cows depend on consistency, on showing up even when it's cold or rainy or when I'd rather stay in bed. That taught me reliability." Richard's expression remained skeptical, but something in Grace's tone made him listen. "When my grandmother had her stroke 2 years ago," Grace continued, "I learned to balance her care with my schoolwork and farm duties. I discovered that real leadership isn't about giving orders. It's about serving others, about putting their needs first. Every day I saw how small acts of kindness could make someone's difficult day a little brighter." Margaret felt a warmth spreading in her chest as she watched Grace speak. The young woman wasn't trying to impress anyone with big words or false bravado. She was simply sharing her truth. "Last spring," Grace went on, "we had a crisis when our main grain silo developed a leak right before harvest. We couldn't afford to replace it, and we couldn't afford to lose the crop. I spent 3 days researching solutions, calling suppliers, and working with my father to design a temporary fix using materials we had on hand. We saved the harvest and learned that sometimes the best solutions come from thinking creatively with limited resources." Richard shifted in his chair, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the table. "That's all very heartwarming, Miss Miller. But this is a competitive business environment. How do you handle pressure? How do you make tough decisions?" Grace's eyes grew thoughtful, and when she spoke again, there was a depth of understanding that surprised everyone in the room. Last month, we had to make the hardest decision of my father's career. Our oldest cow, Bessie, had been part of our family for 12 years, but she was sick and suffering. The vet bills were mounting, and financially it made sense to let her go. But my father couldn't bring himself to make that call. She paused, and Margaret noticed the slight tremor in Grace's voice as she continued. I spent the night with Bessie in the barn, just sitting with her, thinking about what was right. Not what was profitable, but what was right. Sometimes the hardest decisions aren't about numbers on a spreadsheet. They're about doing what's best for everyone involved, even when it hurts. The next morning, I held my father's hand as we said goodbye to an old friend. The room fell silent. Even Richard seemed affected by the raw honesty in Grace's words. You see, Mr. Blackstone, Grace continued, farming taught me that success isn't just about the harvest. It's about how you tend the soil along the way. You can't take shortcuts with the things that matter. Trust, respect, hard work, they're like seeds. You plant them every day through your actions, and eventually, they grow into something lasting. Richard leaned forward, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by genuine curiosity. And what would you do if you worked here? What would you bring to Beacon Industries? Grace smiled, and her whole face lit up with warmth and possibility. I'd bring the same thing I bring to every job, Mr. Blackstone. I'd show up early, work hard, and treat every person I meet with respect and kindness. I'd listen more than I speak, because I've learned that everyone has something valuable to teach you if you're willing to learn. And I'd remember that behind every number, every decision, every challenge, there are real people with real families and real dreams. She stood up gracefully, extending her hand to Richard. I may not have a college degree or corporate experience, but I have something that can't be taught in any classroom. A heart that understands the value of honest work and genuine care for others. If you give me a chance, I promise you won't regret it. Richard stood as well, taking her offered hand. For a moment he saw past the simple dress and worn shoes to the strength and wisdom in this young woman's eyes. He remembered his own grandfather, a man who had built his first business with nothing but determination and integrity, who had taught him that character matters more than credentials. Miss Miller, he said, his voice softer than it had been. All morning, when can you start? The surprise on Grace's face was genuine and beautiful. Margaret wiped away a tear, remembering why she had fallen in love with her job all those years ago. Not for the money or prestige, but for moments like this, when human connection and authentic goodness still mattered. As Grace left the building, that day, her heart full of gratitude and excitement, she carried with her the same values that had guided her through 17 years of life on the farm. She didn't know what challenges lay ahead in the corporate world, but she knew that kindness, hard work, and genuine care for others would serve her well, just as they had served her family for generations. And in the boardroom, 42 floors, above the city streets, Richard Blackstone sat quietly, remembering his grandfather's words. The best investment you can make is in people of character. Everything else is just money. Sometimes wisdom comes not from boardrooms and business schools, but from barns and wheat fields, from caring for those who depend on you, and from understanding that true success is measured not in what you accumulate, but in how much good you do along the way.